Welcome to Terrible Tragedies in Time podcast, where we dive into the chilling tales of times past. We discuss topics from serial killers to natural disasters. Our goal is to dive deep and answer the questions that others have. If the gruesome and horrifying truths are too much to bear, this podcast name may not be for you. Today's topic has mentions of suicide and death. Viewer discretion is advised. Starting off this wonderful podcast here. My name is Cameron. I have been fascinated with this stuff for many years and have wanted to share some of my fascinations with the world.
I'm Nikki, your creepy co-host. I got dragged into this because Cameron can't do things without me around.
Never.
Tales of horror and the macabre are kind of my bread and butter. So info dumping is another thing I'm good at. This was just the perfect thing to drag me into. I'm super excited to share some creepy facts and listen to some tragic tales with you. Today, our topic is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Cameron, have you ever heard of that one before?
I've heard bits and pieces of it. I definitely touched on it in high school history class and some of my college classes, but never actually fully went into detail.
Oh, it's so cool. So, on March 25th, 1911, New York saw its most devastating industrial disaster. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Disaster. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. This fire spread throughout the entire factory, which was located on the top three floors of the Ash Building in Manhattan, which is now known as the Brown Building on the corner of Green Street and Washington Place. The fire killed over 100 factory workers who were primarily young immigrant women, ages 14 to 43, within the span of like 30 minutes. This fire is still one of the most deadly industrial disasters that the US has ever seen more than a century later.
That is such a short time to have such a disastrous fire. What
Dude,
was
I know.
what was going on right before the fire? Do you know?
So, prior to the fire, we had seen the start of what was called the Uprising of 20,000, which was a 4-month long labor strike involving primarily Jewish women working in shirtwaist factories. The Uprising of 20,000 started with a spontaneous walkout of numerous factories within New York City. These women were protesting against long hours, low wages, and unsafe working environments, which I think the walkout was in November of 1909. So this was 2 years prior to the fire. And the women had drawn up a list of conditions to be met, but during the 4-month long labor strike, Max Blanc and Isaac Harris, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory owners, continuously refused to sign the agreement.
Okay, so the girls were part of those protests.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you know what caused that fire?
So it's they estimated that an electrical cord had sparked underneath a work bin that had been used to store hundreds of layers of like flammable fabrics and bits and pieces of sewing stuff. And so the spark immediately lit the waste bin on fire, and the fire scattered across the floor where all of the old fabric and clippings and stuff were littered throughout the place because it was not kept clean at all.
Okay.
Within the span of like 15 minutes, all three floors were up in flames.
So were all three floors the factory floors, or were there different like businesses?
Yeah. Yes. So the 10th, 9th, and 8th floors were the top three floors, and those three floors were the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory floors. I'm pretty sure the rest of the building was other businesses as well. But the factory, they were storing hazardous chemicals and stuff on the production floors. So once the fire spread, it hit those chemicals and just burst those three floors right into flames.
Which would explain why it escalated so quickly.
Yeah, it was insane, I'm sure.
Okay, so today we have a lot of like requirements for fireproofing in the buildings. We have, you know, public buildings have to have a sprinkler system, the fire alarms, all of that, plus your emergency exits that don't lock from the outside due to other tragedies I've heard about. Were there no like fireproofing or fire prevention systems at the time?
So the building itself was made out of brick and steel. So it on the outside was advertised as fireproof, which is what triggered the factories to choose those buildings to put their businesses into. But the interior of the buildings was all wood, which is obviously flammable as fuck.
Which we've known since the start of humankind is flammable.
Right, right. But internally, this building wasn't actually up to any standards. Only one of the elevators worked out of all four elevators, and it was the one down a super narrow corridor that you had to like go through to get to it. Um, there were no overhead sprinklers in the entire building. So nothing to try to distinguish the fires or anything. No fire extinguishers of any sort were in the building. And then the fire escape, there was only one fire escape on the entire building, and it was way too narrow and poorly constructed to withstand the sheer amount of people trying to escape the fire. So it actually ended up collapsing during their rescue attempt.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
So where you said what's up?
To add to the bullshit, to stop theft, the factory owners would lock the building from the outside so nobody could leave without getting their purses checked before clocking out.
Wow.
Yeah, they trapped their workers inside their buildings to prevent theft.
And you said this happened in 1911.
11.
I don't know if that's before or after, but there was actually a theater incident out in London a couple years prior, or whenever it was. I think it was prior. That actually stopped the locking of buildings from the outside. So the doors for emergency exits actually have to be opened from inside due to that event. So it's kind of surprising to hear that, we were still locking doors for people.
Right. It was like this whole thing, like, you don't trust immigrants and stuff, because that
was still popular in that time.
For over 100 years.
It's still a thing to this day.
It's still a thing now.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which is another fucking tragedy. Also, I apologize if there's meowing in this. My cat just showed up to say hello. But the two guys that owned the frickin' factory were Russian immigrants.
It's weird that they wouldn't trust immigrants when they were immigrants themselves.
Yeah, to these Jewish immigrants who'd like barely spoke any English, like we're just struggling to get by. But it's like you are an immigrant yourself and you're gonna be an asshole to these other immigrants. That's absolutely asinine to me.
Yeah, that's baffling, to be real. I mean,
yeah. Sorry, just to throw that tidbit in there. Had to rant a little.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's baffling. You said there were. This is one of the most devastating fires. Were there actually any other fires in that building?
That building specifically, I don't think so, but I think it was 70 years later, something like that. There was another fire in New York that was like the second most devastating, right below the Shirtwaist Factory fire.
Oh, like below like the second most deadly?
Yeah, it was the second most deadly that New York's ever seen to this day.
Oh wow, like to present.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire is still to this day the #1 industrial disaster of all of New York.
Okay. I know you said there were quite a few workers there. How many deaths actually occurred to this fire? Do you know?
Yeah, so out of the roughly 500 workers on site, 146 workers, almost entirely made out of women who barely spoke any English, like I said. They died. 123 of them are women, 23 of them were men. The deaths spanned from burning to death to smoke inhalation to injuries from leaping out of the windows to escape the flames. 70 girls, I think it was, tried to jump from the windows. The first person to jump was a man, though. Are we surprised? No, not even a little bit. Of course, it would be a man to jump from a window first.
That's actually quite surprising. Now, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've read up and from the few psychology classes I've taken, men tend to take more aggressive, more violent suicide attempts in situations like that. Women are the ones that tend to do
the window would be.
Yeah, so women are the ones that tend to actually be the ones who jump from high places, who do the cutting of their arms and stuff like that, more what's
The
deemed as like
dramatic
an
one?
elegant death versus a dramatic, gruesome death.
Okay, so for me, jumping from a window is both dramatic and gruesome.
I could be wrong, but that's what I
Because, like,
recall
you
from
gotta
my
punch through that
studies.
glass. You gotta fling yourself aggressively out that
Well,
window.
I'm gonna assume
I
back in
couldn't do
that
it.
time they didn't have tempered glasses. We use tempered glass up high
Mm,
in those
true
buildings
that.
now, so they don't break as easily due to the altitude as well as things being hit up against them. At the time, they probably didn't have that. They probably just had plain old, sheets of glass, and that easier to break through. It's like dropping,
Fair
a
enough.
glass cup. It shatters on the floor. I mean, you drop a tempered pane, it might shatter, but not as much. You can hit your car window and not break it as easily.
Right. Fair
um,
enough.
so you said people jumped out of these windows. The first one being a man. How high were these windows? That second, third, and fourth floor, or third, fourth, and fifth?
No, so it was 8th, ninth, and 10th
Oh,
floors. So
I was
they
way
were,
off.
yeah, eight to 10 stories up above the ground floor.
There's no surviving that.
And so no, there's really not. And the firefighters even tried to catch them with those 10-foot nets that they had back then. But the force from the fall was fatal for literally everyone who tried to jump.
Well,
Nobody survived
yeah,
the fall.
that's at minimum 80 feet. At
Yeah,
minimum, not
absolutely.
including floor and ceiling heights.
Yep. On top of the 146 dead, though, there were 78 non-fatal injuries as well. So more people did get hurt, but a vast majority of the workers did end up escaping and surviving.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the two owners of the factory survived by escaping to the roof.
Did they end up creating
Was
a
really
new?
hoping they could.
Did they create a new business or did they go bankrupt? What happened there?
So, oh gosh, I had this all written down, but I don't have it typed up in my notes. So let me go to my actual physical notes. Or did I not write this down? Because I remember reading about it. So they ended up getting sued and
I can
ended up having to
imagine.
pay out. They ended up having to pay out $75 per death per victim of the fire to their families and stuff, which is about 2,000 and some change today, compared to, like, I think it was the 400 per death that they got from their insurance company. So they did those families dirty as shit.
Right.
But they did, pay for it. They were tried for first and second degree murder, but they were acquitted, and they got charges of first and second degree not manslaughter, some negligence, yeah, accidental manslaughter and like criminal negligence or something like that.
Which
for
makes
trapping them
sense
inside
for
the
what
building.
happened, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that again. I have it written down somewhere, just God knows where at this point. I've got so many notes in so many places, and
Ain't
ADHD
that the
is
truth?
one
Ain't that the truth? Backtracking a little bit, you said that there were 100 and something injured. Was that just like smoke inhalation and burns, or?
Oh, the 78 injuries. Most of it was like from people trampling each other to try to get out.
Okay.
Some of it was, smoke inhalation, lung stuff, having a cough forever after that. But no, most of it I think was just from them trying to get out of the building in one piece.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, because like jumping from the windows, nobody survived that. And then, some of them were just severely burned but made it out and all that jazz. So,
right.
yeah.
You said that the fire escape collapsed. Did any of the people from that survive? Do you know, or did it collapse like the second they all got on it?
No, so the first like wave of people got out just fine, but once everybody realized that they weren't going to make it out on the elevator, they couldn't get to the roof, they were trapped using, the stairs and this and that. That's when it started to get congested. And I mean, it happened rapidly, obviously.
I mean,
but,
30 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, the fire was in and out in 30 minutes, but people were still, stuck.
Right.
Because there were people, trapped on the roof and whatnot from the 10th floor. But, actually, this is so off what you asked, but the first warnings to the 9th floor for the fire arrived at the exact same time the flames from the fire arrived.
Oh, that's
The The 10th floor got a phone call from the 8th floor saying, hey, there's a fire, but there was no way to contact the 9th floor without running up to the 9th floor because their communications were out. There was no phones on that floor.
Weird. Do you know why?
Right. No, I have no idea. Couldn't figure that one out, but I just remember that being a thing is like, the 10th floor got their, warning just in
Notification.
time. The 8th floor was already escaping. Somebody ran up to the 9th floor and told them, and the flames followed them essentially right up the stairs.
Oh, wow.
So the 9th floor got sucked,
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah. By chance, do you know like how many deaths occurred from that 9th floor due to them not having that pre-notice?
Not specifically, no. I don't know who's from which floor.
Okay.
I know there's a list that you can probably look up with all of that. I just did not dive that deeply
That
into.
That is perfectly fair.
146
Was a little bit of a random question. Yeah, that is a lot of deaths
Right.
to keep track of.
It's a lot. I do know, like, that the youngest two girls were 14 or 15.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah, which is just absolutely tragic.
And to only get,
I think,
that little money for losing your child,
right.
And
I mean, sometimes they would immigrate and it would just be the children that immigrated. So it would be, your 14 and 17-year-old kids off in a new world. And so now the 17-year-olds by themselves because their little sister just died.
Right.
Now they get to write home and tell their parents what happened.
Yeah, that has to be tragic for those families. I couldn't imagine.
It's just hard to think of. There's actually a book that I read. I think I was in like 7th grade when I read it, so I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it. I'll have to look it up at some point. And maybe I'll mention it in a future podcast episode. Just be like, hey, by the way. But it's about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and it follows the story of this girl who's like 16 and she's working in the factory making roses for dresses.
Okay.
And that whole thing it was so hard. I cried in class reading it.
Was it like an autobiography or a historical fiction?
No, historical fiction, and it was sort of like a diary, but not really. Okay. It was her talking first person about the accounts that were happening when they were happening in real time, essentially.
Okay.
But it was written like prose, if that makes sense.
I think
it wasn't like Dear Diary, blah blah blah.
Right.
It wasn't Anne Frank, but it was her talking to you.
Right. So it was written first person, telling what happened. Similar to an autobiography, but it was fictional. It's a historic fiction. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, a fictional autobiography, essentially. A fiction biography. I can't do words.
What were the legal requirements for these kind of factories back then, and buildings in general? I guess I should ask.
I don't think there really were any at that point in time. But 3 months after the fire, once like activists started speaking out again about all of the things that were wrong, the governor of New York, John Dix, signed a law empowering the Factory Investigation Committee, which actually resulted in 8 more laws covering fire safety, fire inspection, fire coding, all that jazz. So that's when that finally got implemented, was after the fire. In 1912, a year later, 25 more laws were instated, changing New York's labor protection standards forever. And many of those laws ended up getting swept into the New Deal later on and helped aid in the creation of OSHA in 1970.
Okay. Couple of things there. The New Deal being like the New Deal we learned in history class, that New Deal, the New York's New Deal? Okay. So this is like a big player in that one.
Yep. Huge New Deal. That New Deal.
And you said OSHA ended up being formed.
Yes, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Right. So I in high school took construction tech, which gives me an OSHA certificate. So it's kind of interesting to hear that this kind of came from that. How exactly led into this? Do you know?
It was basically like what's the word I'm looking for here? Not labor safety, but employee safety, this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. Just making sure that the people are taken care of. Doors aren't being locked from the outside.
Right.
There's a code of conduct that protects workers from, horrible things like sweatshops. Because the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory wasn't technically a sweatshop based on 1911 standards, but would have 100% been the worst sweatshop ever in today's standards.
Okay.
So it kind of went from that to this,
Right.
those are the kind of protections that got put into place.
So it's kind of like the fire happened, and there was a whole group of people who are like, hey, we're not going to let this happen again, and created this OSHA to start regulating more things.
Yes,
which is kind of interesting, because OSHA today, from what I understand of my concept, is it's just building safety. It has nothing to do with like work labor anymore.
Because now I think it's the is it HIPAA?
HIPAA is a health organization thing. It's protection of your
so
medical
HIPAA,
information.
OSHA, and so it's HIPAA, OSHA, and something else. But they all protect like people in the work environment.
Right. So now we have labor laws now. I don't know what the group is for that. Maybe somebody can tell us at some point, or one of us can figure it out at some point.
Also, I will say the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire also helped with unions and whatnot as well, because them picketing and stuff for the better conditions, the better income, less hours, came from them wanting to unionize, and the factory owners being like, no, you can't be in a union, can't work here. Right. They're super anti-union. So now we have, bigger, better, good unions that exist now
that are still frowned upon by workplaces. Yeah. Was this happening during the same time as all of the protesting for the newspapers due to the pay that the newsies were getting?
I believe so, but honestly, my timeline of that is absolute garbage. I kind of hyperfixated on the fire.
That's fair enough. So the locked doors were part of the labor laws, right? That's kind of what created some of the labor laws. What exactly came from that? Is there now like a law stating that doors can only be locked from the outside, or?
So all doors that lock from the outside have to be unlocked from the inside. So like fire exits and stuff, you can't open them from the outside, but you can push them open no matter what. Easy peasy, they're not locked.
Right.
And if they are, there is a breaker box or something, to like, emergency pull that shit and get out.
Kind of like our bus's emergency handles.
Yeah, I think there has to be 2 major exits, and then I don't know if you have to have a bunch of like minor exits or anything, but there has to be at least 2 major exits at the front and the back of the building, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's correct from what I learned from my class with OSHA, is that you have to have the 2 emergency exits now.
Double doors.
Yeah. You have to have at least the 1 main entrance plus the, I think it's like 1 emergency exit per side of the building, I think is what it is, or something like that. Like you have the front half and like the back half. I think you have to have 1 on either side of the building.
It's possible, because
I don't know for a fact. It has been a solid 12 years since I've taken that class. So
you might be right, because like my work building is 1 big building separated into 2 different stores. Mm-hmm. So we only have our entrance and our back door exit where our loading bay and stuff is. Right. We don't have any other exits in the building. We just have the 2.
Yeah, and then I think if you have the floors, the multiple floors, I think you have to have 2 for each floor as well, a front and a back. And that's why in New York now you see all of the scaffolding on the side of the buildings, the emergency exits, is because of that, I believe.
Yep. And the ladders have to be certain width, height, this, that, and the other. They have to be able to withstand XYZ amount of weight. They have to be reinforced, all that kind of jazz. And they also, I think this fire might have ended up being part of why fire ladders extend the way they do now, because the ladders that were on the fire trucks back then could only reach the 6th floor of that building, so they weren't even able to rescue people with their fire trucks.
Wow, that would explain a lot of the people jumping, to be honest. I mean, if you can't reach them even with the ladder, they don't have that escape either. How many,
and I can imagine, aiming for the ladder and trying to jump for it and then accidentally, smacking yourself right off of it happened a good bit.
I can imagine. I mean, the firefighters are there to help you, and how else do you get to them if they can't reach you off their ladder?
Right, exactly. Absolutely tragic. Just the amount of, fear that these people encountered in such a short period of time.
Yeah, 30 minutes. I mean, you know this, Nikki, but I had that huge house fire about 2.5 years ago, and In the span of 5 minutes, I was notified that there was a fire started in the unit next to me in my apartment building, and I got myself and my dogs out, and within 5 minutes of that, the entire roof collapsed in. The firefighters had it out within an hour. Luckily, the only tragedy that happened in that was the neighbor's cat passed away from it. But, I mean, an hour, and I lost all of my belongings in that. So I can imagine how much damage a 30-minute fire could happen if you have all that flammable, fabric and whatnot lying about.
Yeah, fabric, and I mean, it was dirty.
Fabric,
it didn't keep the place clean for anything.
Chemicals, yeah, it's...
Yeah, fabric, chemicals, and cigarettes. Great.
No, cigarettes, yeah. No, because at the time they were allowed to smoke inside. That's right.
They were allowed to smoke inside, but they weren't supposed to smoke on the production floors, but people would do it anyways, usually the men.
Doesn't surprise me. I don't think women picked up smoking socially until the 20s, our raging 20s. Woohoo. The thing everybody wanted now, we got a pandemic from it.
Right. Oh my god.
How many fire units responded to this fire? I mean, I can't imagine there were too many with it only being 30 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think, but like 1 or 2 trucks showed up. I might have a photo that shows like them in front of the building, but I am not entirely sure. That just didn't pop up in my information cache, if you will.
Right.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, so they got acquitted and they were found liable of wrongful death in the lawsuits that found.
So you're talking about the owners.
The 2 owners.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 2 owners. Sorry. It just, I noticed that I had a second page of notes on my computer that wasn't popping up at first.
RIP.
I was like, well, there it is. I knew I had it somewhere. Yeah, so it was wrongful death.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, they were working. They should not have experienced death while working.
Right. No, not at all. And
so,
the way they died was wrong.
Right.
So wrong.
Backtracking again, we talked about the compensation for the deaths that happened. What were they required to compensate for those who were injured due to it, especially the ones with like the lifetime injury?
So it didn't really say. It said that they were only fined for the people who passed away.
Oh. I wonder if anything came from that then.
It was a lawsuit about the deaths. It wasn't a lawsuit about just like total injury or anything like that. So I don't think they really got anything out of it.
Well, they got lucky then. Today, if that happened, those people would be in jail for life.
Right. No, absolutely. 100%.
At least in the US.
We don't have sweatshops. Places like Shein exist.
We definitely do have sweatshops still. They're just better protected by law.
Just better protected, more sneaky beaky.
Mm-hmm. More of a paid under table. Yeah. Man, that's a horrible.
Fair enough. There's no legal sweatshops in America, unlike other places in the world.
Well, America's a little bit better off on that front. We might be bad on other things, but at least protecting people's working rights is something we're good at.
Yeah. Although, actually following those codes is, neither here nor there, because OSHA gets ignored so often in the workplace.
It does, and even when you report stuff to OSHA, OSHA will step in and be like, we don't really care. It's one thing. We're just going to write you a warning and just fix it, and then they never show back up to check it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, OSHA, I'm supposed to walk on ladders a certain way at work.
Yes, 3-point rule.
I do not. Yeah. Do you really think I'm going to follow the 3-point rule while I'm carrying CV axles in both my hands? Absolutely not.
Well, those by OSHA law should not be that high up.
They're on the literal top of the top shelves.
Oh, my.
And I'm supposed to have somebody underneath me to pass them to.
Right.
But that still means I don't have 3 points of contact unless I stick my hip on the side of the thing.
That's still not 3 points of contact. 3 points of contact is, it's 1 foot, 1 hand, and one of the other 2 parts. Either another hand or another foot.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely the best thing that came out of that fire is definitely the OSHA regulations, because even if they're not wholly followed to this day, they're still making workplaces quite a bit better, because to pass
Way
a fire inspection, you have to be payable to pass an OSHA inspection. To build a building, you have to pass an OSHA inspection.
Hells yeah. No, for sure. But no, that's pretty much all I had on the factory thing for the most part. I think we kind of covered all of my bases. Was there anything that you didn't have answered for you that you're still wondering?
No, I think we got it all covered. There was nobody like noteworthy in the accident, was there?
No honorable mentions or anything like that.
Okay.
There's a couple of people who survived that did end up writing or being interviewed about the fire. The last known survivor passed away in 2001 at the age of 107. I can't think of her name though.
Ooh.
But I think she did a whole interview about it, and that was super interesting. I think she was a part of like the picketing and stuff, and she was like 17 when the fire happened.
I was gonna say she had to have been fairly young when it happened, because you said that was like what, 1911, so 2001's 90 years later. So
yeah, so she was 17 when the fire happened, and she's here.
Man, that's gotta be.
I think
horrible.
she was 8th floor seamstress, I think is what it was.
Wow, I can't imagine having to go through that. That would be horrible.
Right. I'd never cook on a gas stove ever again.
I don't. I see them and I walk the other way.
I hate gas stoves, I'll be honest with you. I don't like the smell.
The gas that comes through there is horrible. Then your gas bill also goes up.
And I don't like having a gas bill in the first place.
Tell me about it. I live in an area where I have to pay electric and gas year-round for shit, and it's horrible.
No.
So.
Is it for your water heater?
I honestly don't know what my gas goes to. I think my gas goes to my regular house heater during the winter, which is why it was so much during the winter, but now it's sitting down at like $20, so it's going somewhere in the apartment, but I don't know where. It's definitely not my stove. Yeah. My stove is electric. It's a glass top, so...
Yep. Yeah, no, all of my stuff's electric, because like I don't have a gas bill here, but I know there was places I was looking at because I'm looking at moving, and gas, it was a thing, and I was like, what's that for? She's like, oh, it's the water heater, it goes on gas. I'm like, that's so dumb, but okay.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It might be my water heater that takes it, because I think my water heater is gas powered. I think
Possibly.
It is. Which baffles me, because I think this breaks a little bit of OSHA regulations and stuff, is my water heater is up in my attic on carpeted floor. And most water heaters, where the ignition is underneath the actual tank. So, there's a lot of stuff going on up there. Yeah. In fact, I was just talking with my landlord earlier today that I'm actually really nervous to be storing all my belongings up there because of having my previous house fire and that water heater being right there. Now, it's fully protected. The bottom of the water heater is fully encased. There's no exposure to the ignition or whatever. But it is, up there with all of my belongings. And having a house fire where you lost all of your belongings is definitely one of those things where it's like, I'd rather not. I'm just going to keep all of my stuff on this corner of the room. That can stay over there. Good thing those don't move. Yeah. Good thing those are pretty stationary. It's easy to plan around them.
Right, absolutely.